games are part of Hollywood. Games actually make more money than movies at this point, which is why I went that route, because I could see how big these things were getting, how interactive. And I knew that, well, for one thing, they're more fun to work on than a movie. I spent about 3 days just doing the fire for one movie, and I was bored out of my mind. Just putting, torches and fires and all that. Oh, so boring. Then you do body falls, and then you do this, and it's so boring to do movies. But games, you have this sort of empty palette, with sounds that have never been heard before. And so that's kind of like, it's an empty piece of art that you get to create, So I was really good at monsters, and I was really good at blood and gore and all that stuff. When you are hearing these monsters or these zombies or whatever it is that you're hearing, some scream, some roar, some screech, like in the Alien movies, right? What are you actually hearing? I want you to think about this for a minute. All of you, what are you hearing? What are you hearing when you hear these roar? Why would an animal roar? Why would an animal screech? You see, what we do, or what I used to do, when we wanted to go and get sounds, for instance, a gorilla makes an incredible roar for a dragon, right? Or a tiger or a lion. A bear, right? So we have all this big catalog of screams and roars and but what do we have to do to get that? Do we go out in nature and just hope that the bear does that? No, we go to a zoo or some animal holding place for the pound for dogs, etc. And in order to get those sounds, you have to poke and prod and torture these animals. You're hearing the absolute suffering and pain of these animals. You're hearing a captive animal who is being tortured essentially to get the sound. I'll give you an example. When you want a really good high-pitched screech that you would put to the Alien movies, for instance, you would go and record pigs getting castrated. They don't give them any kind of Novocaine or anything to numb their pain. They just snip. And do not. There's no empathy whatsoever towards these beautiful, beautiful creatures. They cause them pain, and we're there with our boom mics to record, and our shotgun mics to record that pain. And you get these. In terms of my art that I used to participate in, you get these perfect, wonderful screams that can be applied to these monsters that you're hearing in these video games. But what you're really hearing is the suffering, the pain, the absolute anguish of these beautiful creatures who are held captive and tortured. Now, to me, that is enough to stop playing video games. That is enough to say I can't do this, and I can't participate in this horror anymore. Now, I know, because I'm hyper empathetic, that most people probably would not take that position, but for me, that's enough. That is the crisis of conscience. That is enough for me to know that, now for you to know that you can't ignore it anymore, and that when you hear those screams, next time you play that game or watch that movie, you're hearing pain, you're hearing suffering, and it's giving you pleasure. That's disgusting.
You tell me that all the time they do this? It's never simulated with a computer or something like that?
Oh, sure. You take, so what you do is you take the gorilla scream, or you take the bear scream, and if you listen, you'll hear, for instance, scraping metal, or what else did I used to use? Like, scraping metal is the best, because you add the scraping metal to the sound of that roar, and it creates like a monster type of sound. You can combine different animals and make different sounds. The the TIE fighter. Remember Star Wars?
Yes.
The sound that the TIE fighter makes. Yeah, that's an elephant screaming backwards. I used to sit in my. So you're basically in a windowless studio, and you've got big speakers, and you're blasting. I've lost hearing since I, did that for so many years. But you're in this, 10 hours a day or more. You're in this windowless studio, soundproof, all that stuff, and you're what do you do? So during the time where you're editing, taking out little clicks and pops and stuff, you're listening to radio or your music or something, right? Because you don't necessarily need to be listening critically. And so I used to, back then I was listening to InfoWars, Alex Jones, which now, of course, and shortly after that, I was like, wait a minute, this guy's a fraud. But you get to learn a lot of basics with Jones back then. And so what happened to me actually, and I wrote about this. I was sitting there one day, and credit to him, because he did have this interview on with this soldier, and he was basically a low-ranking officer, a low-ranking grunt, but he had played video. He explained that he had played video games all his life, and he was very, very happy about that. And he said it's so great because it's such an easy transition to go right into flying drones. And so this guy was a drone pilot, and he would go in for like a normal work day. He lived on the base, and he'd go into the like what can only be described as a video game booth, and grab the controls, and he'd fly a drone. The drone has like a 4-second delay. So in Pakistan, he's flying this drone, and he's dropping bombs. And he says the collateral damage rate, in other words, the amount of innocent women and children and men that he would kill just to drop the bomb in the correct place, was about 90%.
That's incredible.
So 90% collateral. So that's, what is that? Was it something 9 out of every one are not the target? So it didn't matter if it was a school or whatever. So I'm hearing this. I'm equating that to what I'm doing for a living, what I'm earning mammon, currency for, right? What am I doing to make my way in this life? And it turns out that they were right all those years, that video games do, in fact, and are designed to affect the empathy level, the moral compass of children, especially, and adults. So as soon as I heard this interview, that was it. That was the click. That was what I call my crisis of conscience. I said, what the hell am I doing? Here I have these demons on my screen that I'm making for Resident Evil. And I went around and I asked the other guys, because some of them were Christians, some of them were not. And I asked them, I said, how is it that, do you ever get bothered by this? Is there something about this that makes you want to stop doing this because you're supporting something that is against your religion or against your moral fiber or whatever it is that affects you? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. And essentially their answer is, but I have children, I have this, I'm sold out. I sold out. I can't stop this. No matter how bloody and gory and disgusting and immoral it gets, I can't stop this. And I kept asking people, I kept getting the same answer. And to me, that was the wrong answer. That is what made me stop, because I was like, I don't want to be you. I'm at this point making, getting close to making probably $100,000, $100,000 a year, which is pretty good. I was up to $30 an hour, I believe, something like that, 35. And I quit. I said, no, I don't want to be you. I don't want to get myself into debt, have children, get married, etc., only to become you, a sellout. not a self-professed sellout. I don't want to be you. And it was that interview and later on a video that I saw of the same thing that made me quit, because I am creating the content to destroy children's empathy and adults. I'm creating the content and the sounds to make demons come to life. Why am I doing this? This is not who I am. Yes, it sounds cool. Kids, I mean, kids, when they hear what I did for a living, kids were like, oh, that's so cool. And it sounds really cool. But the reality of it is this. It's disgusting. It's a monstrous, horrible thing to do for a living. And I don't know if people can really relate to that or grasp that, but that is my story. That is how I quit, because I could not be a part of what I was creating to further destroy whatever moral compass is left in people. I can explain the agentic relationship. In other words, it's a term called agency, and it's what everything is based on: citizenship, employee relations. You know, the employer is the agent of its principal, which is its employer. A doctor is the principal of its patient, which is its agent. So in the 1960s, there's a guy named Stanley Milgram, and he's a doctor, and he conducted these experiments where he truly showed how the agentic relationship works. And he summarized his experiments as follows in Harper's Magazine. It was called The Perils of Obedience. And he stated the legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous importance, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. This is exactly why and what the purpose of it was, to show that all it takes is someone to order you to do something and you'll do it. Most people. He goes on, he says, stark authority was pitted against the participants' strongest moral imperatives against hurting others, and with the subjects' ears ringing with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. Ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible, destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear, when they know what they're doing, in other words, they see it, they have absolutely no doubt in their minds what they're doing, and they are asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority. Now, he elaborated these two theories. In the American Psychologist, it was wrote, the first is the theory of conformism, based on Solomon Asch conformity experiments describing the fundamental relationship between the group of reference and the individual person. A subject who has neither ability nor expertise to make decisions, especially in a crisis, will leave decision-making to the group and its hierarchy. The group is the person's behavioral model. And then he says, the second is the agentic state theory. So now we're talking about government, wherein, per Milgram, the essence of obedience consists in the fact that a person comes to view themselves as the instrument for carrying out another person's wishes, and they therefore no longer see themselves as responsible for their own actions. Once this critical shift of viewpoint has occurred in the person, all of the essential features of obedience follows. You see, Once you accept that you are a soldier, once you accept that you are a policeman, once you accept that you are a president, and not just a man, not equal to everybody else, something higher, or once you accept that you have an agentic employment or an office, a title, a flattering title, once you accept that, then you are given powers, you are given authorities, you're given licenses. License means to do something that's against the law, right? You are given this power and you will act, because if you don't, then you don't have any power. You must follow what your master, your principal tells you to do in order to keep your limited power that is granted to you. And so I submit to you that no, most people will, in fact, harm another simply because they don't feel like it's them doing it, just because someone else told them to do it.
Yeah, I can agree with this point for sure. It's I can't say anything against it. It's scientific experiments here. And I remember actually a movie that I watched from 2010 called The Experiment, which puts 26 men, which is based on a real life scenario where they put 26 men in a prison, but it was like an empty prison, and they gave them roles. You're the prisoners, you are the police guys, you know? And so at first they were like not really into their roles, but after a while being in that environment enclosed, and they started obeying what they were supposed to be. And soon enough, a few of those police guys, they really took their roles seriously and started inflicting like some real violence upon those people who were the prisoners. Well, so it's pretty crazy.
Right, and at that point, once you do the violence and people have seen the violence, this is why they show violence all the time on TV and in video games and everywhere else, because it doesn't take violence itself. It only takes the delusion or the thought that if you don't do something that your principal tells you as an agent, then you will have violence put upon you. You only have to believe, and that is why everybody is submissive, is because we, in our hearts, we believe that if I don't obey the law or I don't do this, that boot is going to be on my face, that gun is going to be pointed to my head. It's not necessarily true, but the fear of violence is all that's needed. They don't need violence, and that's why most people, including myself, are of the opinion, according to the evidence, that all these attacks, all of these terrorist attacks, as they call them, all of these school shootings, all these different types of attacks, violent events, are completely fake. They don't need they just need to have the people have a perception that there is violence. They have to show what's called public executions, blood sport. So you have to have the constant threat of violence, of war, of terrorism, of whatever, disease, in order to have continuity in government. So they, when you look up the word terrorism, any definition will tell you it's what government does to its people. That's actually in dictionaries. So they have to create these types of media, including the games, to constantly instill that kind of fear and that kind of conditioning. If you play a game that has police in it, you know that the police are going to be, these bad motherfuckers. They're bad guys. They're the force that's always chasing you, that's always causing you to conform, right? It's this conditioning is how we were brought up, how our children are being brought up, and the more technology and the more realistic it becomes, which is what I did to make it realistic, right? To put those sounds to cartoons that have no sound, that have no voice, that have no existence. The more it becomes real, the more it looks real and sounds real, the more conditioning that is going to be. I tell you this, my opinion, Vosto, is that nobody should allow their children to play any video games.
Well,
Nobody should allow their
uh,
children to have a phone or watch TV.
we are we shouldn't be allowed to make any kind of dark art at all. Like no negative depictions of anything, or what kind of system do you imagine in the art world? Like, do you want to ban the use of the macabre theme completely?
Separate yourself from these systems, from these governments, from these nations. Go to the hills, go to the rocks, whatever. Do not try to live amongst those who are not like-minded. Why the hell do you think I got out of LA so fast? Right? I don't want to be in LA. LA is a shithole. LA is the most immoral, disgusting place you'll ever be. I saw people bring their kids to Hollywood Boulevard where I worked. I used to work right across from where they hold the awards. And the Chinese Grauman Theater was right down the street, right? People would bring their children there, and I'm like, how could you bring children to this disgusting place? It's disgusting. I mean, it's really dirty, and it's there's nothing redeeming about this. Why would you bring your children here? I don't. It's just that we don't have the kind of culture that has that moral law behind it, that moral conscience. We've all grown up thinking that disgusting shit is normal. So I'm not going to ban anybody. I'm not going to say you can't do this. I just want to get the fuck away from you. I want to get the hell away from you and start my own society with like-minded people who don't want anything to do with that. You see, you don't try to defeat it. You don't try to stop Babylon. You don't try to stop the disgusting nature of Hollywood and everybody that's involved in that. You leave it. You stop participating in it. Yeah. And you find people who are like-minded, right? That's my personal take on it. I got to talk to the writers of the scripts who would often attend the meetings. And one of their biggest complaints was that they had to agree to change their script. They in order for a company, a games company, to actually publish and pay them for their script writing, they would have to agree to, of course, changes to the script. And so I'd see them cringe whenever like a line would come up and they change the line, and they just get so upset about it because it would be something ridiculous. Like they would say, I remember one, it was, thank God that Homeland Security was here to save us. They will change the script in order to be pro-government, pro-military, especially pro-military. So, and you find that throughout all of Hollywood. But yeah, that's what their biggest complaint was, that they had to submit to the changes in the scripts, and it would always, like I said, always be pro-military, pro-government, or it would be kind of what you look into, which is this sort of esoteric, even theosophical kind of stuff that nobody really would see. The checkered floor, for instance, or the the Masonic stuff,
or some kind of numbers, right, with significance.
Right. This is why I quit. Just keep in mind, Hollywood, the wood of the holly tree, which, not by accident, is what Harry Potter's wand is made out of. That is the holy sacred wood of witchcraft.
But I'm sure you've been to like E3 festivals and things like that.
How
E3 are those festivals, by the way?
E3 is, I'm not a salesman, so the fact that I was there was kind of worthless. I tried my darndest, but we all got our little T-shirts and our coats that said Sound Deluxe on them, and we would go and you'd talk to these different game people, and each company, Bethesda and Microsoft, etc., has their own little setup. And, you schmooze. You try to sell products. You try to sell your services, say how great you are. And my company specifically, which was one of the top, I was very fortunate. Uh, well, I wouldn't say that. I actually worked my butt off as an intern, an unpaid intern, for months and months and months before they ever hired me. And that was only because I came in after my internship. Each day I'd come in for 8 hours work, and then I'd go in afterwards and I'd practice. Because you don't learn this in school. You don't learn sound design in school. It's something you can either do or you can't do. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice and to make things sound real. And so, we were known to fix other people's mistakes. And so all these sound companies, that would just form and just hire anybody, they would fail miserably and we'd have to fix their product. So that's kind of what we were selling people mostly. But obviously this company I worked for was getting all the top titles, which was great. But when you go to E3, it's just a madhouse of nerds that you try to just fit in and try to sell, basically, and that's what it is. It's a what would you call it? It would be no different than any other conference for any other type of product or corporation, or industry. It's just that it happens to be games, and so some people will go just because it's games, and but back in the background, it's all about the sales, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
If you look at who's supporting the games, there's military games specifically created by the military, which are often war games. Sometimes it's sponsored by CIA, sometimes it's, just about, you should look at who's actually giving money for these games. But then there's this whole other aspect, which is what I used to be highly, highly active in my activism on, which is who owns the gaming companies is the question you should ask. Because you have to understand that government, especially the United States government, but all governments around the world, are all, globalism happened because of investments in corporations, stockholdership in corporations. If you look at the main stockholders of all of these game companies, you're going to see overwhelmingly it's what's called institutional investors. Institutional investors are mostly pension funds of government and different what do you call it, mutual equity type of funds, which are again mostly owned by government. So when you actually see, and I made a documentary about this, of course, the Corporation Nation and the Great Pension Fund hoax. When you see who owns every corporation in the world, which is government combined, if you look at every pension fund in every nation, eventually you see that every corporation in the world is owned by governments around the world, specifically the United States. For instance, Microsoft is, I think last time I looked, it was 73% owned by institutional holders, right? People think Bill Gates owns Microsoft. No, Bill Gates is just the CEO. CEO is not an owner. So if you look at the shareholders of these corporations, you find that in every case, whether it's Exxon or Bank of America, Wells Fargo, whether it's Raytheon, any corporation, whether it's in China, whether it's in Japan, you got to understand that government owns these corporations. And because the main shareholder is the one that technically owns the corporation, has the majority share vote. So government then gets to vote through these private organizations on who is the board of directors for that company and who is the president. The board of directors then elects the president. So government has complete control over every corporation. This is something that most people have never been introduced to. But that was I spent 4 years about researching just the comprehensive annual financial reports of all corporations and governments. And I found out, and that's why I made this 4-hour documentary on it, showing all these investments called the Great Pension Fund hoax. it's on YouTube for free, and you see, oh my God, government owns everything, every corporation. And so you ask, where's that coming from? Somewhere in that mix, there is some agent in between these companies and government telling them what to do. Now, I can't point to a specific agency or whatever, but it's kind of obvious when you understand that aspect of it that everything happens because government says it does. Just to give you an example, why would you want to play something like Call of Duty? Why would you want to pick up a gun and shoot people in a pretend fashion? Why would you want to do? What is it that drives us to find that amusing or fun when it mimics reality, and it tries to mimic reality in every way? Why do we do that? Why is it that is entertainment for us? You have to ask.
Good question. Well, I don't play Call of Duty myself. I think that game is cancer, and now that it has like also this a new thing which is happening in the recent years. So not only the violence aspect or the occultist symbolism aspect is being inserted, but also like ideological scams like SJW stuff and feminists and stuff like that. Like I don't know if you think those are a mechanism of brainwash, but I think they are. I think they are.
Anything to degrade that moral compass, that traditional family unit. Everything is designed to take apart, destroy the family, because that's what's profitable. That's how lawyers make money.
Yeah, so now they have like this feminazi, that's what we call them on the internet. I don't know, I'm part of this gamer culture. We make fun of things, so we call them feminazis. So I have a lot of feminazi influence in all of these new games. Wolfenstein? The recent Wolfenstein is just filled like this race war propaganda. It fuels the hate between the two sides. I don't join any side. I don't join the white nationalists, or I don't join Black Lives Matter. I just want to be in the center. But I feel like they make these new scenarios in such a way to kind of piss off people about these subjects. Like they force diversity. Diversity is like telling gaming companies that they must put an element of every race in the game.
Yes.
And every type of sexuality, or we must accept all fat people. Otherwise, if we have to accept this unhealthy lifestyle and to celebrate it. They celebrate diversity. But what if I don't want to celebrate it? What if I just accept it, but I don't actually want to recommend people to be fat or whatever? I may sound like an asshole. I'm gonna edit this out, but
you don't need to, because what you're talking about is happening. They have passed laws now, and they're starting to do it in the U.S. They're passing laws now where if you speak openly about anything, especially in Canada, you can go to jail for simply speaking about a specific race, or speak about the I won't say because that's how it is in a lot of countries. We're still a little bit, but we're getting there here in America. We're getting to the point where you can't say anything because there's now 50 different genders, right? I mean,
it must say all the pronouns.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And you're actually put in, kids are suspended from school if they don't call you by the right gender identity. There is no such thing as gender identity. It's an oxymoron. Those two words can't go together. Gender is natural, identity is unnatural. But so you can't have that. It's impossible in nature, but in fiction, in law, anything goes. What I have studied is even more interesting to me, which is something called, we call them brain parasites or archons. In other words, if you look into nature, about 80% of all life in nature is parasitic. In other words, it feeds on some other host in some way to survive, whether it's a flower that only exists because a certain bug exists, etc. And when I looked into it, I found out that throughout nature, there's all these parasites that actually create zombies. There was even a National Geographic article called zombies, bugs that parasites that create zombies in nature. The cordyceps are one that was turned into a game called this is The Last of Us. That's a very real thing that happens in nature. It affects the mind of an ant or any kind of bug, and it controls the mind of the bug, and it actually causes that bug to do harm to itself and others, and it creates a spore that like a mushroom that comes out of its head to release spores to find new hosts. Right, so there's all kinds. There's toxoplasmosis, which is a parasite that infects the minds of people, but in order to get to people, it has to go through a rat, changes the mind of the rat to be attracted to cat piss. Then the cat catches and eats the rat. The parasite gets transferred to the cat, and then cats, of course, dating back from Egypt, we've always worshipped cats as pets, and as we treat them like kings and queens. And so they're in their shit. Anybody that's cleaning a cat box is probably exposed to toxoplasmosis. And what scientists have found with toxoplasmosis is that it causes, for instance, someone who is excited about violence or excited about, say, high-speed motorcycle rides that are so dangerous that you're probably going to die. That is it's this parasite that feeds you dopamine or feeds you something that excites you and gives you a sexual attraction, just like it did to the rat, to the cat, and the cat to the human. It gives you this feeling of excitement and pleasure and reward for participating in absolutely stupid behavior, dangerous behavior. And so this guy was doing, he was a professor at Berkeley, and he was doing autopsies of all these high-speed motorcycle crashes because he just chose one thing, and every single one of them that got into a crash and died because they were so dangerous was infected with this toxis. Yes. So I submit to you that that it's very possible. It's very possible that those who are in charge, those who are in government very well, and who strive to be in these positions of power and who have no empathy. I mean, you're talking about an epigenomic change in people that you can shut off religiosity. You can shut off empathy. You can shut off anger. You can shut off happiness in people's through their epigenome, and that's exactly what parasites do. So I would get away from the alien concept, or think of it as more metaphoric, and I would concentrate more on the notion of brain parasites, which are proven not only throughout nature, but proven in humans especially. And they say that 40% of humans are infected with toxoplasmosis around the world.
Yeah, do you think that psychopathy may be one of those form of toxicity passed on through the genetic code?
I have to wonder. I really do wonder that. I wrote a blog. I can send you a link if you want about all of this, and it was called Archons and Mind Parasites and something. Oh my! But I'll send you a link and people can read it. But it's a very detailed notion of how this all works, how it's known. It's a very known entity, so it's really scary when you actually look into it. And compared to the concept of aliens and all that stuff, it's believable as opposed to something that's unprovable and unsubstantiated.
So in this case, the elites, do you think it would be possible that they would make sure that they, for example, when they keep their families, they try to also keep that toxicity remaining through like the psychopathy going to the next generation, and very careful with who they select to be the next wife, or
Yeah. I mean, I personally, I would probably, I would agree with that. I hate to say it, and every once in a while they have one that gets away and exposes a little, a little something something, but. Yeah, I hate to say it, but that is my opinion. Yes.
So, what do you think of transhumanism? Because I've seen a lot of transhumanist propaganda and media and in video games today. So, what do you think? Do you think that plays a part, and what should we do with that?
Oh, we just did a show on this actually about black goo and the black awakening and all that stuff. It's very scary to me. What's happening with that? It's portrayed in games and movies, hundreds and hundreds of movies. This notion of what we're really talking about is programmable matter, right? So if you consider that what is matter? Matter can be anything from an issue that's brought up in court to pus to anything that exists is basically called matter. So if you think about the notion of God's creation or the design of nature, you could say, if you wanted to, you could say that we are all programmed matter. We are all programmed according to the laws of nature. Excuse me, right? If you again applying the metaphor, we're all programmable matter. We are set to exist in a situation where we need air, we need water, we need food, we need love, we need all these things, right? We need what is the creation of God, i.e., Jehovah, right? So, and again, once you understand what that means, existence itself, then the universe and the atmosphere and everything else, then you understand, okay, we need God to exist. We are part of God, in other words. We are part of the whole. And that's a beautiful concept, one that the church will never teach because it wants to keep you away. Religion is more responsible for a lack of spirituality in people than anything. So if you consider that, and you consider that we are matter and we are essentially, if you will, programmed genetically and epigenetically in our bodies to what is nature. And you look around, you see they're geoengineering, they're changing the air quality, it seems like they're almost terraforming the earth, right? To make it more friendly to whatever. It's what it seems like. And so if you consider the notion right now, what they're working on is this programmable matter, which is smart dust, and which is, you can have a vat of black goo, as they call it, and you can program into that vat the notion that you want to put a design in, and it's a chair because you need an extra chair for your party tonight. And out of that vat, for these molecules, this matter, these nano machines, this technology clumps to each other and forms a chair. And you take that chair out of that vat, you use it for the night, and when you're done with it, you put it back into the vat, and you program it to become goo again. And so the nanobots detach from each other and become this sort of programmable matter. It's just waiting for its next command. This is real technology. They've already done this, right? So I'm not just speaking science fiction here. This is real stuff. What we're talking about is what we're scared about is something called ecophagy, which is where programmable matter starts replicating itself and programming itself to the point where humans no longer have control of it. That is perhaps, and the programmable matter keeps growing and growing because it has the entire Earth to use as fuel, and it takes over the entire ecosystem. That is actually a theory posited back in the 1970s when all this started happening, this technology growth. And this is why I'm against technology at this point. I'm ready to go back, and that doesn't mean I'm against a plow. It doesn't mean I'm against something that I can use manually, but this kind of technology that is completely out of control, which is the very basis of the movie The Matrix, an out-of-control technology, or the Terminator series, an out-of-control technology. This is much more frightening because this is smart dust that can enter into your body and change you. Right? It can change your genetic makeup. It can alter your consciousness. So imagine that getting out of control and taking over, just changing the entire biosphere of the world. So I find that a very frightening and unfortunately very realistic concept. I got to tell people, man, spiritual awakening is not a pleasant thing. It's a painful journey. It will require you to break down, have a mental breakdown. And that's why they give us drugs. And that's why they give us antidepressants and antipsychotics and Valium and all these things that calm us down, alcohol, everything to stop us from having a mental breakdown. Because you know what? You see, this is what I had in Hollywood. I didn't mention this, but I had a mental breakdown in Hollywood because I was carrying 3-4 different projects. I went through identity theft, and I had a medical issue that I was going through all at once, plus a couple other things, and I couldn't handle it. I had too much stress. I had to work 12-hour, 14-hour days at the time, and I broke down. I had a mental breakdown. I didn't have any drugs to take care of it for me. I just had to go through it. And when you have a breakdown, right? I don't mean I went crazy. I mean my mind just could not keep track of everything I had to do. I had credit card companies and people were using my identity. This is how I know that my identity is not my own. My person is not my own because someone stole it. Right? It's not me. That's why I know that the person is not the man, because it was stolen from me and used and abused. And people were buying homes and selling cars and getting credit cards and bank accounts and stealing all my money. And it was horrible, horrible, horrible. And so I had a breakdown. And when you have a breakdown, I highly recommend it, because when you have a breakdown, you no longer respect that shit. I don't give a crap what my credit score is anymore. I don't want a credit score. Credit score it's crap. It doesn't mean anything. It's one of those symbols that you worship and you respect, even though it's against you, right? So spiritual awakening is having a breakdown from everything that is simulation, everything that is in the Matrix, everything that's fiction. And when you have that kind of breakdown, which everybody needs to have, that is when you have a spiritual awakening, or at least a part of one. And that is what happened to me in Hollywood when I started realizing what was happening. All right. So that is when you start realizing everything is wrong. That is a very painful process. But it's beautiful. It's wonderful. Everybody must go through it.
Yeah, it's the freedom. You discover freedom when you have nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.